Following the philosopher David Hume, skeptics will often accuse Christians of special pleading. We're very eager to accept the resurrection of Jesus and other miracles reported in the Bible, but we're just as swift to reject miracle claims made by other religions. Critics will say that if you accept one miracle, you have to open the floodgates to them all. But is that true? Could there really be a way to sift through all the noise? Enter Charles Leslie's terse yet powerful book, A Short and Easy Method with the Deists. This booklet is around 40 pages, but it packs quite a wallop. Leslie's method is a religiously neutral test regarding how we can judge an event as undeniably historical. Leslie proposes 4 common-sense tests that make no reference to any particular faith. While his criteria makes allowances for miracle claims, they definitely do not permit any gullibility. So what exactly are Leslie's 4 tests? Number 1, that the matter of fact is such that men's outward senses, their eyes, and their ears may be judges of it. 2, that it be done publicly in the face of the world. 3, that not only public monuments are kept up in memory of it, but some outward actions are performed. 4, these such monuments and such actions or observances are instituted and commence from the time that the matter of fact was done. To clarify, Leslie isn't saying that in order for something to be historical, that event needs to pass all 4 marks, but if the event in question passes all 4, we can be sure that it really happened. One example would be America's independence from the British. It was an experience of the senses, it was a public event, Independence Day was instituted on July 4th in 1777. We can obviously be certain of it. Now, in consideration of the first 2 of Leslie's criteria, he gives us a hypothetical scenario. Imagine someone claims to have split the Thames River and led 3 million Londoners over on dry land southward. We'd think this person was either joking or that they were crazy. We definitely wouldn't think that they were telling us the truth. Now, in consideration of Leslie's next 2 criteria, he gives us another illustration. No one knows for sure who set up Stonehenge, or why it was set up, or what exactly it commemorates. There are imaginative stories from the 12th century that giants brought the stones from Africa to Ireland for their healing properties. The 5th century King Aurelius Ambrosius wanted to build a memorial to 3,000 nobles slaughtered in a battle against the Saxons and buried at Salisbury. At Merlin's advice, Ambrosius chose Stonehenge. The king sent Merlin, King Arthur's father, and 15,000 knights to remove it from Ireland, where it had been constructed on Mount Caleres by the giants. They killed 7,000 Irishmen, but when the knights tried to move the rocks with ropes, they failed. Then Merlin, using special, read magical, gear and skill, dismantled the stones and sent them over to Britain, where Stonehenge was dedicated. Well, why hasn't this story caught on? It's pretty simple. Nobody saw it. This wasn't a public act that anyone would have witnessed. The story first emerged hundreds of years after the alleged events happened. This is an example of the fact that you can't persuade people from a monument based on historical events that they haven't even heard of before. So what miraculous events would pass the test? Leslie argues that Israel's miraculous deliverance from Egypt would pass. There were 10 plagues in Egypt, and there was the miraculous passing through the Red Sea. This would be a public event that would be a subject to people's senses if there ever was one. We know about Passover. God commanded it to be celebrated from the very start. Now imagine someone in Hezekiah's time smearing lamb's blood on their doorposts and sweeping out all traces of leaven in their house. Their neighbor asks, "Hey Josiah, what are you doing?" Josiah replies, "I'm getting ready to celebrate the Passover. You know, the time that our people got delivered from frogs, locusts, hail, passed through the Red Sea. It's all in Moses' law. It's gonna be awesome." Obviously, this wouldn't have caught on. So does the resurrection of Jesus pass the test? Leslie moves on to the claims of Christianity later in the book, which is based on the resurrection of Christ. Looking at the first 2 criteria, Jesus appeared to people after his resurrection. He spoke with them, ate food with them, and invited people to touch him. The resurrection was apparent to their senses. Jesus also appeared to many people, sometimes in groups, including the 11 remaining disciples, and over 500 at once. The resurrection was a public event. The first 2 marks ensure that the original witnesses of the event weren't deceived. This was because the event took place in public, and anyone with eyes and ears could see and hear it. So what about the next 2 criteria? Skeptics tell us that the resurrection stories came late when the original witnesses were long dead, but that's not true. The early church practiced the Eucharist and baptism to commemorate the death and resurrection of Jesus from the very beginning. Communion and baptism are all rituals memorializing the death and resurrection of Jesus. Logically, the event commemorated must come before the action that commemorates it, so the death and resurrection of Jesus were being celebrated in the very first century. Well, what about supernatural events in other religions? How do they stand up against Leslie's criteria? Leslie gives us counterexamples of miracle claims in other religions. For instance, Muhammad's miraculous single-night journey from Mecca to Jerusalem wasn't a public event. We only have Muhammad's word for it, and even some Muslim commentators have suggested that the Isra was a spiritual dream and not an actual journey. Apollonius of Tyana's miracles were written over a century after the events took place. He lived from around 15 to 100 AD, and Philostratus wrote his biography in approximately 220. Philostratus wrote in Athens. Apollonius's alleged acts happened nearly 1,200 miles away. These miracles were not objects of sense, with memorials set up immediately afterwards. Leslie also mentions that while heathen deities have priesthoods, feasts, and other public institutions and memorials, but all of these didn't start from the time that their stories were said to be done. Those were known to be mythologies not based on historical claims. So for example, feasts to Bacchus or Apollo started ages after what was reported of what these gods allegedly said and did. They can't be proved. The priests of Bacchus and Apollo were not ordained by the gods directly, but later appointed by men. So the question that remains is this: are Leslie's criteria good indicators of the truth? It seems like they're commonsensical enough. Leslie's bold claim is that if the events meet all four of his criteria, then the event is certain. I think that it's probably best to make a more modest claim that it's reasonable to accept the event. His criteria also rules out opposing theories like myths, private visions, or legends. Someone feasibly could come up with a counterexample that refutes Leslie's principle. That said, reportedly, Conyers Middleton, infamous for his written drubbings of ecclesiastical miracles, looked fruitlessly for decades for one. And by the way, the golden plates of Mormonism don't seem to cut it, so don't bother putting that in the comments. Golden plates by themselves are not necessarily miraculous, and 3 of the main eyewitnesses basically recanted. Had Hume paid attention to Leslie, I think he wouldn't have made this slippery slope argument that he made in his essay of miracles. Leslie clearly shows that a miracle claim can be strongly attested. One doesn't have to gullibly open the floodgates and accept all miracle claims. But neither do you have to be hyper-skeptical and reject them all.